There is a pattern most people don't notice about loneliness. Most people see someone with very few friends and quietly reach the same conclusion. Something must be wrong with them. Maybe they're awkward, maybe they're antisocial, maybe people simply don't like them. But very few people ever stop to examine the pattern beneath that assumption, because psychology reveals something surprising. The people who struggle to build friendships are often not socially incapable, they're socially selective, and those are two completely different things. Most people see isolation, few people see the pattern behind connection. Some people collect dozens of acquaintances, others spend years searching for a single person who genuinely understands them. From the outside, both lives can look lonely. From the inside, they're driven by completely different psychological patterns. One seeks company, the other seeks authenticity. Think about the last conversation that truly stayed with you, not because it was entertaining, not because it was funny, but because for a brief moment you felt understood. Those moments are rare, far rarer than most people realize. Yet some minds refuse to settle for anything less, and that's where the pattern quietly begins. Because the difficulty isn't making conversation, the difficulty is finding conversation that feels real. For some people, small talk feels strangely exhausting, not because speaking is difficult, because pretending is. Imagine walking through an enormous library, millions of books surround you, thousands of voices, endless information, yet none of them contain the answer you came searching for. Eventually, you stop opening random books, not because you dislike reading, because you're searching for something specific. Human connection often works the same way. Some people can enjoy almost any conversation. Others instinctively search for something much deeper. Psychology has long observed that people with high levels of self-awareness often develop lower tolerance for superficial interaction. The more aware you become, the harder it becomes to ignore what feels artificial. You begin noticing tiny inconsistencies, forced laughter, performative kindness, conversations that never actually say anything, smiles that disappear the moment someone leaves the room, hidden competition disguised as friendship. Most people overlook these things, some minds cannot. And once you begin seeing those patterns, it's surprisingly difficult to pretend they're not there. That's why something interesting starts happening. Your social circle doesn't become larger, it becomes smaller, much smaller. Not because you hate people, because your mind quietly begins filtering them. Not by popularity, not by status, but by authenticity. This is why many people misunderstand solitude. They assume being alone always means loneliness, but psychology suggests something different. Sometimes being alone is simply the cost of refusing relationships that don't feel genuine, and for certain personalities, that cost is one they're willing to pay. The strange part is, from the outside, people assume you're difficult, quiet, cold, maybe even unfriendly. But internally, an entirely different process is happening. Your mind isn't rejecting people, it's searching for alignment, searching for honesty, searching for conversations that don't require performance. And that's where another hidden pattern begins to appear. Because once authenticity becomes your standard, ordinary conversation starts feeling very different. Not empty, just incomplete. The pattern becomes even clearer when you look at the kinds of conversations that leave you feeling alive. Most people ask, "How was your day?" You find yourself wondering, "What changed you?" Most people talk about people. You become fascinated by ideas. Most people exchange information. You instinctively search for understanding. Those are not the same thing. Have you ever walked into a crowded room and felt completely alone? Not because nobody spoke to you, because nobody truly reached you. The voices were there, the laughter was there, the conversations were there, but somehow none of it touched anything real. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a mismatch between social interaction and psychological connection. The body is present, the conversation is present, but the mind remains untouched. That's why something strange begins happening. Silence starts feeling more comfortable than shallow conversation. Not because silence is exciting, because pretending to connect becomes more exhausting than being alone. Most people misunderstand this completely. They assume you're antisocial. But the pattern says something very different. You aren't avoiding people. You're avoiding emptiness disguised as connection. Imagine drinking salt water. From a distance, it looks exactly like fresh water. It promises relief, but every sip leaves you thirstier than before. Some conversations work exactly the same way. They sound like connection. They imitate connection. But when they end, you somehow feel even more disconnected than before. Your mind eventually learns to recognize that feeling. And once it does, it stops drinking. This is why meaningful friendship feels so rare. Not because meaningful people don't exist, because meaningful conversations cannot be forced. They appear slowly, unexpectedly, almost accidentally, and minds that crave depth would rather wait years for one real connection than collect hundreds of empty ones. Then another layer of the pattern quietly reveals itself. The conversation may end, but your mind doesn't. Hours later, you're still replaying it. Did that joke sound strange? Did they misunderstand what I meant? Why did they pause before answering? Should I have said something different? Meanwhile, the other person has probably forgotten the conversation entirely. Psychology has a fascinating explanation for this. Highly self-aware people often possess stronger internal monitoring. Their minds don't simply experience interactions, they review them, analyze them, replay them, almost like an editor watching the same scene again and again, searching for tiny mistakes. Not because they enjoy it, because the brain believes improvement comes through analysis. Unfortunately, analysis rarely knows when to stop. Every smile becomes evidence, every pause becomes a clue, every silence becomes a question. While everyone else has already moved on, your mind is still sitting inside yesterday's conversation. This is one reason social interaction becomes surprisingly expensive. One conversation may only last 15 minutes, but mentally, it occupies the next 6 hours. The pattern isn't poor social ability. The pattern is cognitive depth. Some minds process conversations long after conversations have ended. And the more deeply you process, the more emotionally expensive ordinary interaction becomes. That's why your social battery often empties faster than everyone else's. Not because people are difficult, because your mind never fully leaves the room. Then the pattern changes again, because eventually you stop wondering whether people understand you. You begin quietly assuming they probably won't. Many people who struggle to build friendships have carried the same invisible feeling since childhood. The feeling of being slightly different, not dramatically, not obviously, just enough to notice. Your interests seemed unusual. Your questions felt heavier. Your humor landed differently. Your curiosity wandered where other people's attention rarely stayed. While everyone else seemed to understand the unwritten rules of belonging, you often felt like you were translating a language everyone else spoke naturally. Psychologists sometimes describe this as social incongruence, not because there's something defective about the individual, because their internal world doesn't easily synchronize with the environment around them. Most people adapt to the room. Some people instinctively observe the room instead, and observation changes everything.